Hi everyone, Krystal here with Krystal Hise Portrait Artist. Thank you so much for joining us for part two of Watch Me Paint. Today we're going to be continuing a painting of a Maine Coon cat. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so in part one, we went through and did quite a bit of the cat's ears, a little bit on the cheeks, the nose, and kind of starting to come down here around the muzzle. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue working in the face area. We haven't gotten to the eyes yet. I'm really excited to start there. There's going to be a bit of getting rid of the whiskers, so to speak, so that I can really work on the fur underneath, and then we'll bring those back at the end. Sometimes with dogs that only have a few little whiskers, those actually aren't painted back in the final portrait, but with cats, they look a little funny without their whiskers. So we definitely will be adding back some whiskers to this beautiful cat here. But in the meantime, something that's really important with this digital paint is that we can get to the darker fur underneath, so that way the whiskers don't end up looking all schmeary on top. So let's get right to it. I continue on this same paint layer here. We're probably only going to go for about 10 minutes today just to keep it nice and short and light. There are times where I go significantly longer with my paint sessions, really if I'm in a good zone. But today, especially for a watch me paint kind of thing, I want to keep it light and short just so that you can dive in, have some fun with it, and then take a break and come back when we continue with part three. So that's where we're at right now. And I noticed this gray part coming a little too close, so I want to add some orange back. Right in here. Like I said last time, a lot of what we do with paintings in terms of artistic license is deciding what to keep and what to ignore, for lack of a better word. Some things are very important to maintain in the final portrait, and other things, they're just not needed. And that is in part an important part of what the artist needs to do is to decide what those elements are. Okay, that looks pretty good. One of the things I absolutely love about this process is just how soft paintings can make fur look, both on cats and dogs. I think that it is a really beautiful medium to really tell a tactile part of the story of having an animal with really soft fur. And you can still get plenty of fantastic clarity in terms of things being in focus, so to speak, like you would with a photograph. But instead, you get that really soft feel from the brush strokes. Okay, just kind of bouncing around to see if there's any spots that I missed last time. Anything that's catching my eye. There's some unnecessary green there. Once I'm done painting the subject, I will come back in and make sure we do a good job of blending her into the background. So there is some of that like excess green that I'm seeing here, especially along the outer edge of her ear. I'm calling her a her. I don't actually know the gender of this cat, but we can get rid of a little bit of it here, but I'll definitely make sure that when we do some blending of her into the background that none of that excess green shows up inappropriately. Okay, so let's come down here and work on the cheeks a little bit. You might notice as I go along here things that I'm constantly doing, and this is both for this as a practice paint, but also with all of my client paints. I am constantly doing things like changing the size of my brush, the angle of my brush, so that I can make sure that I'm laying down each brush stroke with intention. And that changes as we go through. Sometimes I need a larger brush, sometimes I need a smaller brush to do more detail work. Um, and sometimes I add color to my brush, and sometimes I'm using just the colors that already exist in the photograph. But yeah, that is always something that is changing on the fly the whole time. And once again, this is not necessarily for teaching purposes. That's not the goal of these videos. This is more just for fun so that you guys can get a sneak peek behind the scenes of how my process works. This is very, very similar to how I do client work, but I definitely believe in always getting better, always improving. And for me, that means doing practice paints outside of my client work too, to make sure that my skills are always staying nice and sharp. All right, so this is a segment where I want to make sure that I have some paint on, just because I am covering up some of these whiskers so that I can really get to painting that darker fur underneath, and then those whiskers will come back later. Painting has a tendency to go through what my mentor likes to call, and I happen to agree with her, an ugly phase a lot of times, especially when you're doing stuff like this. Like right now, this just looks like I put a dollop of paint on the screen and just kind of smudged it, but that is because it's all part of the process. It will not end up looking like this when we're done, because we're going to layer on more color and texture on top of all of this. But underneath the whiskers, this cat does have a lot of that darker fur back on like the neck area. So definitely need to let that layer go on, and then we can bring some of the white from the muzzle here to come out a little bit, and then at the very end is when we're going to add the whiskers. Just going to add some bigger brush strokes here to lay down more paint, just to let this part go by a little faster. Otherwise, I'll spend the whole 10 minutes doing this tiny little bit. Gonna come in like this. I know it looks like we're getting rid of the cheek line here. That's why I do all my painting on a separate layer. I'm not actually painting on the image itself. So that way I can turn on the reference image, or turn off the paint rather, and show the reference image, so that way we can compare. And I do that typically many times throughout the painting process so that I can make sure I haven't accidentally shifted a facial feature or gotten a line really long. There are some times I will take some artistic licenses if I feel like the posing of a particular subject is falsely making something look a way that it wouldn't really look in real life, but it's good to have that reference there. Okay, I'm going to turn the paint off for a second and bring some of this cream and white back out over top. Except we still have some whiskers here, so let's zoom in a little more and paint out some of the whiskers right here. I love the huge number of colors that we have still in this muzzle area here. It is not just one flat white color. We've got everything ranging from orange to cream to beige to bright, almost a bluish white. It's just really beautiful. I love it. Okay. Make a big brush here. Turn off the paint and kind of work this back in and out. So we'll definitely massage that area a little bit more later, but feel like we've accomplished what we set out to accomplish with respect to the whiskers. Speaking of, there's another one right here we're just going to go ahead and get rid of. Another reason I get rid of it in the paint as opposed to just leaving the whisker there as we go along is because photographs have a different feel to them in terms of texture and noise than when you go through them or when you go over them with paint like this. And so if I were to leave anything from the original photograph in the final file of this digital paint, you'd be able to tell right away that there's a bit of a textural mismatch. So I have to make sure that I really go over every single pixel of this image and I leave nothing untouched. Otherwise, it'd look really weird. And I don't want that for my clients or in a practice piece. So we are making sure we go over absolutely everything. Oh, I love the way this chin is looking. Very nice. I can tell I've already gone over 10 minutes. So I'm probably going to take it maybe another 15 minutes total, just so I can get a little bit further on this left cheek over here. So there's some what looks like, in the photography world, it's called chromatic aberration on these whiskers here. You can see some greenish, bluish, almost an aura around the whiskers on some, and then more of like a pinkish aura around others. That happens sometimes in photography, and that is going to make some of this a little bit trickier to paint out, but that's okay. That is part of the process. Sometimes it's easier to get rid of one whisker at a time. Other times it's easier to tackle multiple. It just kind of depends on what exactly you're doing with the brush stroke. I think I'd like to take a little bit of this dark color and bring it in through here. Yeah, I like the way that's looking. Okay, how about some of this orange? Because these are colors that are already there and that the cat definitely has in her fur. Okay, let's go to this dark color now. And really get rid of some of these right here. Okay. Just gonna finish this little cluster right here. Get rid of, make sure I'm getting rid of that blue that we talked about, that greenish blue chromatic aberration, while keeping these beautiful fur colors still intact. And keep it looking like fur instead of brushy smudges. I'm actually going to bring some of that lighter color in here to give that some depth and texture underneath. Okay. And let's just finish this last little guy here that we started. Okay, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes when you get started on something like this, it can be hard to stop. Mostly because you know it needs to be done, so you just want to get it done. But this is definitely not a one-click, super easy kind of thing, especially since I'm wanting to maintain really the look of, beautiful fur that is layered and textured and has a little bit of wildness to it and doesn't look flat. So I am literally picking up and making brush strokes with this pen with every brush stroke that you see making changes on the screen. So this is an incredibly specific and custom process. Even if I were to repaint this cat 10 times, it would look different every single time, because to remember to mimic every single brush stroke the same way would just be impossible. Okay, I think I will leave those last little whiskers to the beginning of part 3, just so that we can do a little zoom out and take a look at what this looks like this time. Oh man, I am really getting excited about this one. Okay, so we'll leave these little guys right here for next time, but let's zoom out these guys and then the kind of outside of those guys. This is looking pretty darn good. One of the things that I'm seeing right now that I'll need to address in a future Watch Me Paint is the side of her mouth on the left side looks quite a bit different in terms of what I may have moved than the right side. So let's turn off the paint layer. Yep, okay, and turn it back on. So this part of the mouth on the next one, I'm gonna need to pull out a little bit to the right. Let me make this brush bigger so that you could potentially see it, although I'm not sure if you're seeing my cursor. Okay, let me add an extra paint layer here. So one of the things I am going to do in another live stream or another recording is, can you see the difference between here and here? Those are looking different in terms of just how far out that white is looking. And if I turn off my paint layer, they look a lot more balanced in the original image. So this is a great example actually of when I'm going through and working on client work, there are certain things that I do to really make sure that I am making appropriate depth changes or getting certain things the way I want them to look on a base layer of paint. But then I need to come back and make changes based on if anything has moved or if I've taken anything too far. This is definitely not a sit down in one sitting and do everything all together. It's important for me to be able to see stuff like this so that I know what I'm going back and changing or adding in the future. So this is just kind of a fun way of showing you my process of how I'm thinking and when I've made changes that I know I need to go back and alter again in the future. So let me switch back to webcam mode over here. So guys, thank you so much for joining me for part 2 of Watch Me Paint. I know I said it was going to be 10 minutes. Definitely wasn't, but thanks for sticking in here with me. And I look forward to doing this again. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.